Today for the first panel, we will talk about how to empower users, about ownership and interoperability for the Web3 era. We will have a few speakers. So first of all, Robby, from CEO of Animoca. Mic here. Thank you. Okay, I think it's on. Then we have Riccardo from my neighbor Aris. Mic as well. Take your mic. Thank you. Sebastien Borget from the BGA Sandbox and also founder of the NFT Factory here.
Welcome home.
Saro, the CEO of Alien World. And finally, Bilal from PyratzLabs that we actually moderate this.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening to you, panelists. Thanks to the NFT Factory for having us here. So I'm very excited this evening to talk with you guys because it's going to be centered about interoperability, and there have been a lot of promises the past 2 years around that. And my first question, very directly, it's like can you guys re-describe us how can interoperability enhance user experience across Web3 platform in the digital realm? What are the value proposition of having interoperability in gaming, basically?
Should I start? Okay, right. So I think to understand the concept of interoperability, we really have to consider where we are coming from in the digital space. It's been almost 30 years now that we do have content online, whether it's photos, video, media file, game asset, things that we actually create with computers or we purchase on our mobile devices or computer with actually real money. And all that content, believe it or not, even if we're living in a realm of new technology, it's actually quite limited, quite constrained. You cannot really use that content anywhere you want, even though you bought it in some marketplaces or platform. And this is something that is very visible when you're thinking about the spaces of games and virtual worlds. If I buy some content with my virtual currency in a mobile game, I cannot use it in any other mobile game. I cannot transfer it outside of that game. I cannot transfer it to any other user. It's a whole closed walled garden, closed environment. And so you have all those digital content and you thought that maybe I could use it in different ways, and that is not possible. So thanks to blockchain is like this public database that provides the trust, the transparency, and a lot of other information around digital scarcity, value, and more. The asset no longer sits within one environment, within one application. The asset, those digital content, they now can belong to the user, and they can be moved across different applications as this user use their wallet as a way to connect to the different applications and services. Yet, it doesn't mean that because you have an asset on your wallet that it does something into an application. So the concept of interoperability is that finally those assets can be used seamlessly into different applications, can maybe have different utilities or use cases, but at least you have that digital freedom that your content can be used anywhere else in the way you want and without any constraint that is being set by the platforms or the technology itself.
One of the things I might add to that is that you started with where we've come from. And I think, in a sense, that creates the foundation of where we're going to, which is, of course, that we know that the industry is super nascent, right? I mean, it's only been around for a few years. And the particular applications for which many assets were created in the first place may not even ultimately be the applications where those assets find more perpetual and long-lasting and different sort of use cases, right? So, of course, we know that crypto is very cyclical. Projects come and go to an extent. And that is sort of a feature, right? As well as being something that we're hoping eventually will become a little bit less prominent. But so what that means, though, is that once the assets are things that you own immutably in your own wallet, then a community can arise in part because those assets exist and can take it forward even if the original project, falls away or is not so active. And that has happened in crypto before, where groups of, a community has sort of resuscitated a token and breathed new life into it and created use cases for it that actually weren't the original ones. And so this is the way in which communities are there's a sort of a legacy that can be built in where members of a community can come and go by buying and selling their tokens. So you can exit a community by selling your tokens. Someone else who wants to be part of that community buys them. This is part of, when that is yours and can be used in different applications, there's a potential for a longer lifespan to those assets.
That's an excellent point. And Seb, I'd like to get you on something, because you've mostly defined what interoperability is, but what are, and Saro, you gave a very good application that is compelling. And a couple of years ago, I was listening to you, Seb, and you talked about the ability to port the history of a gameplay within another, or as well transfer it. Can you develop a little bit on that?
Yes, I think interoperability can be decomposed into different levels. Like the first and most simple approach to understand interoperability is to think about just the visual representation of your digital asset. You have an image. That image, you don't necessarily need to maintain it as an image. It can become a 3D content. It can take another form into different games. Let's take an example. I have a sword into an RPG game, but I want to connect my wallet to a racing game. Should it still be a sword? No, it could become a car, it could become a car part, etc. That's the first step, the visual representation of it. The second step is interoperability doesn't mean whenever you connect your wallet and you use your asset, it starts from scratch, it resets the history that is associated with this asset. For example, within many video games, when we have an avatar, when we have a sword, we accumulate experience points, we accumulate history, we accumulate maybe coins and other things that are attached to that asset. We don't necessarily want to start from scratch every time we reconnect that asset to an application. We want to port the status, the social status, the level of the player, and a set of metadata that can come with that asset, and then that give even more option to the different games and applications to read that metadata and to provide a new interpretation of it. So back to that example of the racing game, that car part maybe can go twice faster if your sword were a sword of level 100 because you spent months into playing. So all the experience, all the time you accumulated with the asset can also be transported with interoperability.
Thank you. Robby and maybe Riccardo, but mostly Robby, as MochaVerse is tackling one of these problems. In the context of the metaverse, what mechanism ensures user control over their digital assets and their identities?
So I think, following on from some of these comments, I think one of the things that is so great about this idea of interoperability is it's founded in the idea of ownership. And ownership in the Web3 sense is really defined by possession, meaning it's in my wallet, so therefore I'm the one who owns it because I possess it. And so I think we have the same potential to be able to possess or repossess, if you want to think about it from Web 2, our own identities. And so what we've tried to do with MochaVerse is to create a system starting out with gamers and people in our gaming ecosystem that allows gamers to essentially have their own identity in digital form, which builds upon what Sebastien was actually just talking about. How do you accumulate some of that history, some of that culture? Because we do, like to think of NFTs as a store of culture. And so this way, you can accumulate your history, but not necessarily restricted to just one application or one game. You can actually do it across the Web3 ecosystem, because that's really important, because that's then a second layer of interoperability, which is you want to have that ID be portable. So in some cases, you may have the sword or the car or an avatar of yourself that you use in multiple places. But when that's not appropriate because it's a different game, or maybe it's something in education or healthcare and it's not a game, you can still bring your identity and everything about it in a secure and private way.
Yeah, and
It's working.
yeah, and I think actually to build on top of that, I think that we can have analogies, which is a bit like writing something on a paper, and this is the state of Web2. Everything was written on a paper, and then there is no really way to share it easily. What then we are doing now, we have a typewriter. So we have a way to writing very fast in a very uniform way. So everybody understands that, hey, this is an NFT, this is something that everybody can see, everybody can touch, it works with the same standard. But then there is not really a way to manipulate this, to transfer. Like we talk about interoperability, it's not working anyway.
Your voice is very loud.
Thank you. We talk about these standards that actually everybody can read and use and stuff, but ultimately, how do we interoperate? How do we share this? Like if I have a paper that is written with a typewriter and I send it to you via fax, you're not able to read it. You have to print it, read it, and then you have the same experience. Those data, they don't change. If you want to change one letter, if you want to change one sentence, you cannot do it. Interoperability is about having email. Having something that, hey, I can write it, so this is fantastic, and I think that we are at this stage. But then we have to talk about what is the standard to send information from one to another so that we can use it. I can read the history of my previous game. I can take it. I can build on top of it. Maybe I get another power from another game, and then I give it back to another game. Or how can I read these NFTs from this motorbike game to another motorbike game? So we need really this, and it just needs to be built. Easy.
All right, thanks. And is, for example, my neighbor Alice implementing any interoperability aspects or identity, embedding identity? Are you doing something with MochaVerse, for example?
I wish, I guess. We in Aris, we mainly build this layer. So that's what we've been doing in the last 3 years. We are giving our proposition on how to have this standard on-chain, and we're using it in Aris. We are actually talking and implementing with some partners, and I would like to have much more of them, and to show that actually we maybe have the email or stuff like that, really. In terms of identity, it's something that we thought, and there are a lot of great solutions around, like Mocha and others. So our goal is to support this into this conglomerate that we call Metaverse of Alice. But they do this greatly, it's not ours.
I was going to say also, one thing that's important is that the purpose of creating MochaVerse also is not to create necessarily a standard for the whole industry so everybody has to use it. That's not the point. It's not very Web3 either. The point is, if you think about it as a form of ID, it's a little bit like a passport. Lots of us in the room have different passports from different countries, and that's okay. We don't all have to have the same one. But the most important thing is that we all recognize each other's passports, right? And that gives us a system that works and interoperability that works.
Often you're talking about passports. Let's talk about the decentralization impact in the game industry. How does decentralization shape the development of digital ecosystems, including both Web3 environment broadly and gaming?
Come on, Sarah, you got to start as a decentralization maxi.
Well, there's lots of angles on that one. I mean, so I think that there's a few things. So one is that the genie is kind of out of the bottle in the sense that now consumers have the beginnings of a taste for what it means to actually be in control of their identity, what they own, and how they interact with applications. So the first thing is that consumer expectations, I think, have changed somewhat in terms of that it's not just enough to interact with one application, give over your data to them. People are getting the taste for owning their own data, owning their own identities and their own assets. I think, though, the extension of that is that because tokenization is the underpinning of decentralized crypto systems in which ownership is shared amongst all of the participants to varying degrees, tokenization creates this sort of consequence, which is that people who own a system together are very incentivized to build it out. They're very creative, they're very entrepreneurial. And I think this might be the sort of secret sauce that Web 2 and traditional gaming is actually fundamentally like most scared of and wants most to sort of appropriate if they can, which is this like an evangelical sort of community loyalty thing that we have in Web3, where people have a strong sense of allegiance and identity with the communities that they own the tokens collectively of. And this is the other consequence of it is that innovation is very rapid, right? So we break things quickly, things progress quickly, because when you're a co-owner of something, you're nimbly sort of trying out ideas. These entrepreneurial ideas come to fruition, creative ideas come to fruition very quickly. This is something that traditional, both gaming but also just Web2 in general, finds it a little bit hard to replicate because they're so much more risk averse, right? Their entire paradigm, as you said, the walled garden. Once you have a walled garden, your job is to defend it, right? Build a higher wall and make the stuff inside it as nice as you can for as long as you can. But there's an inherent, it's hard to map that mindset onto the Web3 mindset. There are challenges also in Web3, though. I mean, profitability and sustainable business models have so far eluded us to some degree, right? We still rely a lot on tokens, and therefore we're quite dependent on the market cycle. So it's not like we've nailed the equation completely, but there is a part of it that we've nailed, which is the dissemination of ownership and all of the consequences that that brings in terms of like vibrant communities, active development, and so on.
Thank you. Building on the community aspects, what do you think? Web3 is very like community-oriented, community-focused, and what strategies are key to building sustainable and inclusive communities? Maybe Riccardo.
Yeah. So when we created My Neighbor Aris, there was this concept of Animal Crossing, and then I was wondering, how do we make this Web3? You know, this is the game they want to make. It's beautiful. Like, it looked beautiful, graphic was amazing. But then we were making a crypto project. And in Web3, it's very easy to have like a PvP, you know, fighting and sort of very, very hardcore competitive games. But how do we make something that actually is collaborative? How can we make that image that you see around here, how can we make it into a game? And actually what we use is game theory. So basically, if people collaborate, they should have a better outcome. And this we experimented, and we say, what if you can water the plant of your neighbor? So My Neighbor Aris, you have your land, you go to your neighbor, and you water the plant. And the plant grows richer, or maybe you can just plant instead the person that is next to you, because maybe that day is not playing. And what we noticed is that people were really watering out of kindness, expecting maybe that one day when they don't have access to the game, somebody else will do it. So I think that for sure there is a part of the community. I was expecting part of the community to be very like focused on the financial part, on making money and stuff. But so far, we didn't see it. So I think it's super important the way that you set up your project, the communication that you have, and how the value that you show into your game, like not the value monetary, but the values that your game is. And the community actually embraced them. And this to me is the biggest way to wash my karma, really, because
it's an amazing testimony.
Yeah, I mean, I have a way to create a game that actually embrace and rewards kindness. I think it's super romantic as an idea.
And to keep building on that, maybe Seb, how can you, for example, in the Sandbox, control any abuses that can happen in those open worlds? And maybe some malicious people can bring bad vibes to a specific community.
Yes, I think like the topic of like toxicity and harassment, virtual harassment has been like quite covered in the press, and it exists because people believe that in virtual world, because it is virtual, like their behaviors cannot be associated with their real physical self, and like there should be no boundaries. But that's not the truth. Like there should be guidelines, rules, code of behaviors, and even laws and police to enforce them. I think all of that should be decentralized ultimately in like an open metaverse. And in the meantime, we're relying on technology to help us like control, reduce toxicity within in-game conversation, using AI to remove like bad words, slang, etc., and also monitor like user activity automated way as much as possible, because like it's still very hard and mechanical Turk machine kind of work to process. But before like diving too deep into this aspect, I think that like what does like interoperability brings in terms of like positive value within like virtual world and communities. And the way that Sandbox position itself, it's like it's a user-generated content platform that wants to add value to a lot of communities, wants to provide them a 3D virtual space for them to connect. And it's a very strong value proposition at actually. Most of the communities, they exist in a form of like we own collectively a unique and digital asset from a collection. What does that ownership mean collectively? Like we just can show it on the marketplace, a wallet, and OpenSea. Sometimes we are able to access a gated Discord, a gated Telegram. It's very flat, it's very 2D, it's very restricted. It doesn't allow much more beyond, except staying within those actually Web2 platforms. By having implemented interoperability with 50 different avatar collections, so it starts with profile picture collection, Bored Ape, Cool Cat, CloneX, not only just Ethereum or Polygon based, but actually also from other blockchain. That's a topic we didn't discuss so much about the challenges. For example, Claymation, Claymates, from Cardano, we've been able to enable the holders of those NFTs, the member of those communities, to discover new things beyond what those communities were originally meant to. In the case of Sandbox, come to a social hub with their 3D avatar, start to chat, start to make friends, start to play together, start to build together. So I think like there is a lot of positive value that can come from interoperability, not only for the platform and the developers themselves, which acquire new users, but for the existing communities that are interested to go beyond and enable their asset to be on the blockchain and be utilized on other platforms and services as well.
And then, I mean, just by extension, just briefly, like freedom of choice, right? So if you have more applications in which you can use your assets, or a community can go to another destination, in theory, if one becomes toxic, there is actually then the ability to choose a different environment that is less so. That doesn't take away from the, you know, the benefit of moderating existing platforms, but it does provide an opportunity for people to get out of somewhere that they don't want to be and move somewhere else.
And I was going to say, back to the point of identity, if you have your entire history on chain, that can include when you're not so nice. And so that will follow you on chain forever.
That's a very good point, yeah.
Definitely the moderation needs to be rethought in the Web3. Like there is not a person that would say you're bad or you're good. That's a big challenge that we will see.
Elon fired them.
Yeah, he's ahead, you know.
Just to go even deeper on this sustainable community building aspect, maybe MochaVerse or Seb, do you envision a world when we can go a little bit more beyond and imposing like best practices or sustainable best practices, enforcing them in the game in order for people to be educated as they're playing or interacting in the community?
All right, it's a very interesting question that doesn't only pertain to like virtual worlds. I do believe in the greater good in general, and from like self-organizing societies that can be governed. And if there is a social norm that's being accepted, and there is a larger group of people which behave like this, a good code of conduct is sufficient. It doesn't need to enforce law, etc. And in this world, we have a few countries that it's actually relatively safe, and it's because thanks to that social norm, like you think about Japan, you think about Switzerland. In those countries, you can literally leave your door open of your house. You can put your phone on a table, you can leave your wallet on a table, and nobody will steal it from you. Nobody will try to harm you pretty badly. I think like people have accepted that because we trust each other and because we understand the bad impact of such action and the repression of it is quite strong, then like the greater good of our behavior is prevalent over like having to enforce and police and so on. If we're able to establish from the beginning, and thanks to the communities, the guidelines, and the decentralization over a group of people into virtual world, those kind of behaviors, maybe it will start to shift in the right direction. But if we start with like on the opposite, already only happening bad things, virtually killing each other, abusing each other, harassing each other, and nobody says a thing. Like unfortunately in France, if you go to the subway and someone steals your wallet, nobody will react. It's a social norm to stay silent. If you do something, someone will actually eat you, and police will not come, and so it's not a very safe environment to feel and to live in. In other countries, it's not the same, and that just says it all. And I think like it's the same in what can happen in virtual world and metaverse.
Let me rephrase quickly towards Riccardo my question. For example, your world, Riccardo, is very green. Do you implement some, I don't know, awareness around global warming, how to prevent it, how to have a good green behavior?
Yes, so...
And develop on that, please.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's...
Because you have a big platform to do so, and...
Yeah, so we have a lot of... we don't have, for example, pollution. There is no, for example, concept of...
deterioration, destruction.
Yeah, everything is renewable, and that's actually something that you also see in the sort of economic flow in the game. So when you create something, the item is made with wood. The wood actually is from a death tree that you find already in your land. So it's not that you're destroying life. Animals are your friends, and everything is very kind. But maybe I want to add something about the moderation, because I think it's super interesting, and I think it's really a big challenge that we will have. Because setting the tone is one thing and needs to be done, is super important, and it actually really brings good value. But also what we have to think is, what is our role into stopping another person's thoughts or way of saying? And this is something that, for example, you see in social media. If you're on Instagram and you show a naked body, you're probably going to be banned. If you show a statue that is a naked body and is a piece of art, then it's okay, but maybe it's not. So there is a blur line that is very complex to decide, and is usually cultural, in the same way that it's cultural to call out if somebody steals, rob a person, is also cultural definition of what is nudity, for example. And for example, we are in France, there is a lighter concept of nudity, for example. So I think that ultimately moderation will be delegated to the communities. And actually we have all these communities that are growing in the Web3, like, I mean, I don't want to name them because I already, like Mocha. And actually they can describe their own version of what is allowed, what is not allowed, and people can just decide not to interact with some community. And this is possible because
totally
then everything is on chain. So you don't want to see people with Mocha, you can just do it. Do you want to see only the people with Mocha? You can do it. And you don't even have to talk with them because everything is interoperable and decentralized.
So I think back to what Sebastien was saying, it's about this idea that people will naturally tend to self-organize, just like we do in society generally. People will hang out with other people who share their values or share their hobbies or like killing zombies together. It doesn't matter what it is. You have some kind of shared passion. And some of those may be, adult content, or it could be, killing zombies, as I said, or something that is very, different kind of content from things that other people like, but that's okay because it means that people can create spaces and self-police their space based on the fact that, well, I showed up and yeah, I don't like the vibe here. I'm going to a different place.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is the process by which communities hash that out. Because actually, there's often not an explicit shared understanding of what are the common denominators that bring people together until there's a disconnect and they disagree, and suddenly it's like, no, it's totally definitely not okay for such and such a thing to be going on, and the other people say, well, I'm okay with it. And this is obviously really difficult for the people involved, and because they've invested something in that. These are not, even when interoperability is, there's like this picture of it being a perfectly liquid, I can just go here, I can go there. But the reality is that once you've invested time in communities, it's not super easy just to pick up and move on. But if it's possible to, then that is the process by which communities kind of go through the dialectic engagement by which they figure out what they are and what they're not. And of course, they always come to us to police it, right? Like we constantly get requests from the community saying this or that thing happened, and most of the time we don't intervene because unless it's explicitly kind of not allowed, that has to be something that they figure out for themselves, essentially.
And I think there's an important principle in this that is very Web3, which is that in Web3 communities, the communities themselves are owners of the activity. So they co-own the activity along with the developer or the publisher. And so there's an expectation, I think, that the responsibility for policing is also therefore shared. And I would say the argument is that for Web 2 platforms, because the Web 2 platforms take all the ownership and take all the profit and revenue, it should be their responsibility to police it, not the users.
Yeah, it's also not perhaps possible because they actually have the moderation power because there's only one platform and they own it. Whereas in decentralized systems, there's numerous platforms. So for example, the same community might use both Discord and Telegram. And so they might actually operate different moderation expectations across those different platforms. So it's that, numerous different platforms coming together in Web3 actually create the opportunity for there to literally be decentralized norms that are prevailing across them.
I think it can all be said on-chain data. Like some worlds can declare, like, look, we're here and we accept people who have committed before some bad action because we are more welcoming community and we want you to like prove yourself again. While some other might decide, like, oh no, like we're very elitist and selective and only top 10 percentile people with the best behavior and who give and care are accepted here. And that's interesting because those are things that are not really possible in Web 2 because the data is, you don't own the data, it's not transparent and so on. So that can definitely lead to new use cases here.
Maybe one last question on the standardization. So we've been discussing about, again, the interoperability, but it needs standardization for that. What's the status of this standardization? What are the obstacles for them to be established and how can we address them?
Okay, I'm going to jump in first then with the plug. So we're all on the board of something called the Open Metaverse Alliance for Web3, OMA3, and it's a nonprofit that we set up as an industry-led consortium basically to try to solve exactly this problem. We're getting there, but it's not easy. We have lots of different working groups that work on different issues, whether it's portaling and mapping, so you figure out how to move content from one place to the other, or it's the NFT working group to figure out NFT standards, or the token group that works on how to exchange value. And the idea is that we wanted to have an organization that reflected the community. We didn't want some big tech company to eventually tell us all that we have to obey some standard that doesn't work for all of us because Web3 is a grassroots open source movement. So please, I would encourage everybody, go to the oma3.org website, join us, and have your say because everybody's got a voice.
Yeah, I can add on something on this because I'm more in, I work more on the technical level on OMA3, and it's super important that if you have a project, you actually apply. You don't have to be every week there or anything. It's important to get everybody's technology so we can make sure that a standard can be interoperable with you. Because I guess that is all in our interest and in your interest to have something that is interoperable, which is also the topic of this panel, and to make sure that your solution then is able to talk with everyone.
Yeah, it's really a unique chance to, in a way, sit at the table to be able to set the standards of tomorrow. Like I wish, like when internet was started, like I had a say into like how it could impact the thing we wanted to do as Sandbox, how multiplayer protocol should be done, and a few other things like that. And here you have this chance because we're still early in the space, and we want to build that future together. We have those different working groups that are really like you contribute as you want. They meet once a week, once a month. They present their results. Sometimes they publish papers. I think we published already 2 working group papers. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the result of that work already after over a year to show you that it's not just a simple membership status. There is actually really people committed into it.
And also, obviously, the people who have the biggest impact are the ones who put in the most work. So it's not about who has the biggest TVL or anything like that. It's about who puts in the work and tries to find good, solid solutions.
All right, last question, but you can just answer yes or no. So I was thinking more about the corporate or the historic gaming players. We've seen in the last bull market that they've done a lot of announcements, but like my interesting question is, do you guys really believe that they can shift their model to create a globalized Web3 game? So can it come from them?
You mean the Web2 game companies?
Yeah, exactly. Like Ubisoft, Epic Game, they've been...
I think the easiest example is to look at what happened to mobile. And you saw a huge amount of innovation early on from people who were native to the new platform, like Rovio or Supercell. And then you saw the latecomers who were the people who already dominated console and PC before that. So the people from the previous generation will tend to come late and follow once it matures.
Okay. So you think they can change their business model, basically?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I mean, look at Oracle. Oracle is a Linux service company now.
I think that, I mean, of course they can pivot and have Web3 games, but the solution will not come from the Web2 companies. If we are asking, hey, how does Web3 look when it's mature? Because clearly now it's not. Now we are building. I mean, we are in this NFTs kind of gaming on blockchain since 3 years. Making a game usually takes 4 or 5, a big, large game. So definitely now we are not seeing what is the Web3 gaming. This is still in the making, and we will see it. This will not come from the Web2 companies, and I think it's a good strategy. I mean, if I was a CEO of a Web2 companies, I would stay here on the window, see who comes up with the best interoperable standard. Or maybe I join Ometry, I don't know, and then I just implement what is there. But I have so much money, power, that I can just integrate it once it's on the market. I don't have to develop it. And probably this, the mindset that we all share about decentralization, interoperability, blockchain, they don't have it.
Seb, yes or no?
I will provide a little bit less radical answer. I would say they are curious about it, for sure. Like I know whether Epic, like Tim Sweeney has mentioned about NFT, he want to learn about it. He's not closed on it. He has made some progress with the Epic Store approving Web3 games. So he has shown some good willingness to stay into an open ecosystem. You were mentioning Ubisoft. It's actually one of the founding members of the BGA, and they've launched multiple products and games that utilize blockchain and Web3. And even if they were not maybe successful in the first try, they kept trying. So it's a pretty good example in that sense. They didn't jeopardize the whole business of Web2 either, but they did some tests, right? And at BGA, we are seeing a growing number of like large Web2 gaming companies from Asia, Nexon, Krafton, and so on, that are launching those test initiatives to learn more as a lab and R&D and see what can come out of it. And I think it makes sense because, well, we're seeing like big shifting market forces, like those established stores, which is the Apple Store, the Google Play Store, that really led the distribution of games and the traditional user acquisition model that has been growing for the past 10 years. Since there's been a few laws set by Europe and followed around the world, around privacy, around data collection of users, etc., like they cannot target users anymore the same way that they've been doing before. So the whole basis of their business model to target user and apply a formula called CPI versus LTV, cost per install to acquire that user versus the lifetime value that user can generate once you have hooked them in and made them spend into your application, is no longer valid because, well, you cannot target users anymore. And when you cannot target users anymore, your CPI goes through the roof, but your LTV didn't go better. And the market, with the inflation, actually users spend much less into like the entertainment side because they have less money. Everything else has risen around them. So revenue is decreasing. So it's a very tentative thing for them when like the business model that they learn is being so much challenged that they are struggling now. And the first thing you see is the gaming industry. I don't know any game companies that didn't let 20 to 25% of their staff go, like Twitch, Amazon. We've seen Unity themselves, Riot. That's a big sign of something is happening here, and maybe it's the verge of something else that's coming right after. So we'll see.
Yeah, I would say that's a complex question because I mean, it depends a little bit on what you say a Web3 game is. Is it just a game that has NFTs? Probably then yes. You know, is it a game that has decentralized communities at its core, and those communities really have a certain amount of autonomy and creative capacity and so on? Probably not so much, because those moats. Yeah, and then I think then there's, as Seb was talking about, the distribution channels. I mean, these were closed to many of us in the last cycle, and now they're beginning to open up. And further ones then were created by some of the native blockchain participants. So yeah, complex answer. I would say the broad stroke, though, is yes, because fundamentally they can leverage the technology, and they have such a lot of capital to deploy towards it that they will be able to have Web3 offerings, whether they really contain that kind of unique DNA that emanated from this industry in the last few years, probably not so much. But will that matter? You know, a little bit yes.
No, I think your nuance is good, because I was inspired by the question, because I was thinking of the Ubisoft case, which basically, from my understanding, is that the problem is not developing game, not at all. It's that their historic audience was not meant for those games, and so there was no product market fit, literally. And that's why I think it's a challenging question. All right, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody.